He shall be the greatest, who can be the most solitary, the most concealed, the most divergent, the man beyond good and evil, the master of his virtues, and of superabundance of will. Precisely this shall be called greatness, as diversified as can be entire, as ample as can be full. And to ask once more the question, is greatness possible nowadays? Beyond Good and Evil was first published in 1886, and it is considered a further elaboration of the ideas Nietzsche introduced in Spoke Zarathustra. It is clear from the title of the book that Nietzsche's main goal is to unleash a critique on the preconceived notions of good and evil as these were defined mainly by philosophers and religion. Beyond good and evil essentially means that reality and people cannot be seen under a binary prism of morality, but each attempt to define morality needs to be nuanced and thorough. The subtitle of the book is a prelude to a philosophy of the future. He clearly understands that the world is changing, and he wants to use this realization as a motivation to attack everything that is holding us back from embracing change and evolution. In the book, Nietzsche adopts his usual critical and polemical approach. He starts the prologue of the book with a very intriguing statement. Supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women, that the terrible seriousness and clumsy persistence with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been unskilled and unseemly methods for winning a woman? During Nietzsche's time, dogmatic truths were the norm. Psychology and other sciences were still at an embryonic stage, and people relied on abstract belief systems to interpret truth and reality. He believes that this approach is clumsy and wrong, and it can't help philosophers win the truth, which he considers to be a woman, ergo difficult to understand. After his polemic towards philosophers, he goes on addressing a plethora of topics like the notion of the free spirit, the natural history of morals, an analysis of people and countries of his time, as well as his examination of the essence of nobility. It is important to note that Nietzsche considered a lot of his views as an experiment in abstract reasoning. He is someone whose methodology is deeply entangled in what could be called what-if scenarios. As it is stated in the introduction of the Cambridge edition of the book, we find embedded in Nietzsche's basic view of himself the recommendation not that we read his texts as aiming at objectively valid judgments, at judgments that are true irrespective of the cultural and psychological context in which they are made, but that we think of them as narratives that he invites us to listen to without really obliging us to believe in them. Reading Nietzsche requires an open mind. We expect a lot from philosophers, but we also need to see Nietzsche's works as a fusion of philosophy, poetry, and masterfully articulated abstract reasoning. He was a pioneer of thought, and regardless of the errors spotted in some of his thinking motifs, he still revolutionized the way we think, and we should all be grateful for this. It is the business of the very few to be independent. It is the privilege of the strong, and whoever attempts it, even with the best right, but without being obliged to do so, proves that he is probably not only strong, but also daring beyond measure. He enters into a labyrinth. He multiplies 1,000-fold the dangers which life in itself already brings with it, not the least of which is that not one can see how and where he loses his way, becomes isolated, and is torn piecemeal by some minotaur of conscience. Supposing such a one comes to grief, it is so far from the comprehension of men that they neither feel it nor sympathize with it. And he cannot any longer go back. He cannot even go back again to the sympathy of men. Owning oneself is not an easy task. Nietzsche looks at the world around him and sees mainly people who prefer to be dependent rather than independent. This annoyed him a lot, to the degree that he adopted more or less an elitist stance towards others, and this becomes more apparent in his idea about slave and master morality, as this will be discussed in a bit. Nietzsche believed that it's in our passions where we find ourselves. This belief constituted one of his main attempts to use philosophy as an instrument to understand and engage with the human psyche. Throughout the Enlightenment, reason was the predominant virtue. Essentially, most philosophers espoused the view that through reason a person becomes enlightened. Nietzsche, however, opposed this idea as quite conservative. He believed that reason, the way it was portrayed during his time, was equated with conservatism and suppression of our nature. He does not want us to suppress our instincts, our passions, our emotions, but to confront them and embrace them. That is how we understand ourselves better. That is how we own ourselves. Without a deep understanding of the nature of our inner world, we're just constantly exposed to a fake reality and become victims to the twists and turns of life. We must constantly test ourselves, as he writes. One must subject oneself to one's own tests, that one is destined for independence and command, and do so at the right time. One must not avoid one's tests, although they constitute perhaps the most dangerous game one can play, and are in the end tests made only before ourselves and before no other judge. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or the generous deed out of selfishness? In spite of all the value which may belong to the true, the positive and the unselfish, it might be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life generally should be assigned to pretense, to the will to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those good and respected things consists precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted and crocheted to these evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps even in being essentially identical with them. Perhaps, but who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? Reading Nietzsche can be frustrating at times. As a person who is strongly defending his positions, one would imagine that he is an evangelist of truth. But why is he so adamantly promulgating the opposite of that in the previous passage? In another passage he writes, the strength of a person's spirit would then be measured by how much truth he could tolerate, or more precisely, to what extent he needs to have it diluted, disguised, sweetened, muted, falsified. The contradiction is quite evident. Or is it? I guess that every great thinker needs to battle with this kind of contradictions. Truth can be difficult to define at times. Truth can be nuanced, it can be multifaceted, it can be complicated. Our willingness to pursue it constitutes a very onerous endeavor, and our ability to tolerate truth showcases the strength of our character. Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth? And uncertainty, even ignorance. The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? The idea of questioning almost everything is emblematic of Nietzsche's writing style. Through this process, he recognizes that one becomes smarter and cultivates a more holistic understanding of the world. More specifically, he likes to go against the dogmatic nature of philosophical prejudices. So he urges us to question our assumptions and our dogmatic beliefs, especially when we philosophize. As I said before, Nietzsche wrote this book during a time when psychology and science were at an embryonic stage. He was sensing that we will be in a position very soon to understand the world around us better, so it is time to destroy the old world and lay the groundwork for the new one. In a tour through the many finer and coarser moralities which have hitherto prevailed or still prevail on the earth, I found certain traits recurring regularly together and connected with one another, until finally two primary types revealed themselves to me, and a radical distinction was brought to light. There is master morality and slave morality. Nietzsche touches upon the concept of master versus slave morality in Beyond Good and Evil, and expands on it in the Genealogy of Morality. Before I attempt an analysis of the concept, I want to point out that I'm not in favor of the use of the words master and slave here. Nietzsche believes in self-responsibility, so he considers hierarchies a natural byproduct of our nature. The ones who are strong and responsible will rise to the top of the hierarchy, and the ones who aren't will stay at the bottom. For me, such distinctions are just byproducts of our social mythology. I am against hierarchies and against anything that creates inequality and polarization within our social systems. Regardless, Nietzsche tries to make a point here. The point is that a person who adheres to a master morality is a person with a heroic attitude. He alludes to the ancient Greek heroes as archetypes of this kind of morality. Master morality is the morality of the strong-willed. Its essence is to focus on everything that is noble. Qualities that are often valued in master morality are open-mindedness, courage, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and an accurate sense of self-worth. On the other hand, slave morality is the morality of the weak-minded. As it is eloquently stated in Wikipedia, slave morality does not aim at exerting one's will by strength, but by careful subversion. Nietzsche believes that people who adhere to slave morality seek equality just because they don't want to work on themselves, and instead of trying to become masters, they prefer to bring everyone to their own level. Again, I believe that this is a critique to everything that is weak, similar to Seneca's critique when he wrote that all cruelty springs from weakness. The slave and master morality can be competing forces within one's psyche. As he writes, I would at once add, however, that in all higher and mixed civilizations, there are also attempts at the reconciliation of the two moralities, but one still finds oftener the confusion and mutual misunderstanding of them, indeed sometimes their close juxtaposition, even in the same man, within one soul. Nietzsche didn't propose the master-slave morality dichotomy as a panacea to our moral conundrums. He believed that a constant re-evaluation of our moral landscape could give us a better understanding of our inner world. As I said before, these are not the most ideal terms to use when covering such sensitive topics, but Nietzsche always wanted to make noise and would use controversial terms in order to be heard. In any case, while aiming towards a philosophy of the future, one must always have in mind that equality cannot exist without self-responsibility.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications and comment below something cool please, so that more people can discover it. If you want to watch more videos from my channel, check out this one and this one. Take care, see you soon. Adrian out.